Compared to sequels of other movies, at least Blade Runner 2049 has something to say. Directed by Denis Villeneuve and starring Ryan Gosling, the film is dripping with the sort of intrigue and atmosphere that we would hope would be modernized from its original work. I'm glad to say here that it does. While I would not say that the film is perfect, I think Roger Deakins and Villeneuve worked together to create an incredibly coherent film that feels as though every shot was meticulously worked to the fullest extent of the movie's lavish budget. Compared to its original, 2049 was given much more breathing room in its production, and it shows. Compared to the first film, Ryan Gosling's investigation of a replicant child is far more clear, the connective tissue from one place to another far easier to understand. While Deckard lucks into finding people who make snake scales just down the street, Gosling's Agent K travels far and wide, but each moment asks and answers a question of logic towards the next location. The cinematography of the film, its visual language, is actually quite simple. Deakins uses an artistic vanishing point to great effect, conveying so much depth and plenty of establishing and transitioning shots. At other times, the camera rests on a flat angle and is pulled back to maintain depth and create a dynamism in characters or blocking. Much of the new special effects in 2049 are signposted well, foreshadowing their use or disuse later in the film. There are several return visits to sets by characters that allows for a benefit to coherence as well. It is one of the most visually impressive and evocative movies to date, perhaps in some ways more so than Villeneuve's work with Dune, but of course that could be debatable. For a movie of immense clarity despite its sparse script, a 5 out of 5 works. While there is an incredible emphasis on visual and spatial flair in this movie, I actually did not experience the bleak dread of this world compared to the original film. That is likely due to the abstracted detail of its sets, which feel very clean and sterilized compared to the polluted spaces of the 1982 backlot. There are occasions in 2049 where time feels like it has moved on profoundly from the 2019 date. But if I had to choose which time period to live in more, 2049 is the obvious choice. Unlike the questions of identity in the first film, the question of what reality is in 2049 is, although something different, not something I was as eager to get behind. I did not appreciate the story of finding a lost child, as not only did it make clear certain ambiguities about Deckard that I thought could go without mentioning, I think it is a plot that kept direct confrontation at bay for too long. In the original film, Deckard goes toe-to-toe with Zora, Leon, Pris, and Batty in a much shorter runtime. In 2049, the added runtime and the plot pushes the fight with Love to the end. The lack of emotional involvement with Love compared to Batty, for example, puts more weight on Agent K's shoulders than I think he was ever meant to bear. K's relationship with Joy, played by Ana de Armas, while much stronger than Harrison Ford's with Sean Young, is not necessarily one for the books. I think all of this culminates in a film that is stilted, that feels, for much of the runtime, like an art piece, rather than a movie with characters and psychology. I think because of all this, an intensity of effect of 3 out of 5 makes sense. In my mind, the core of the sequel is an exterior question of what constitutes an authentic reality. When Agent K tells Deckard that all the best memories are hers, quote-unquote, we are made to understand that K is relinquishing his ownership over these moments in attempting to return a proper reality for others. The film does a lot of work in the intervening moments between Deckard's capture and K's liberating him to explore this. The obvious one is Deckard's rejection of a young Rachel who supposedly is identical to his original. Another is Ryan Gosling's loss of his Joy by Love, to afterward seeing an advertisement of Joy placarded inhumanely along a major road. This external question of what reality is has been, in my opinion, largely questioned better in books of neuroscience, even other science fiction films. Nobody in their right mind would doubt the influence of The Matrix. But even a smaller film like Moon, starring Sam Rockwell, goes to great lengths to explore similar themes. While the original movie does a great job addressing the universal problems of psychology, there is a confidence to character decisions in 2049 that feels starkly different. Deckard knows that his Rachel easily overpowers any copy. Agent K is so sure of his affection for Joy that he arranges a three-way with a corporeal subject. K is proven definitively wrong, while Deckard is vindicated. There is some ambiguity here, as both characters can prove to have had experience expressing affection, and when Kay makes a decision, he is giving the victory to Deckard. And perhaps in this way, his sacrifice comes from Deckard's authentic justification for leaving his daughter to keep her anonymous. In my mind, other movies have addressed these questions of reality in deeper and more terrifying ways than this, from Total Recall to Mulholland Drive to Fight Club to The Truman Show. It's an application of the Blade Runner aesthetic onto another deeper meaning without broadening the conversation. So because of that, a complexity of 3 out of 5 is appropriate here. 2049 is a sequel, so this conversation of originality is going to be very complicated. We should start with something probably certain. The sex scene in 2049 is not only much stronger than the original, it uses its sex scene to ask questions about how sexual encounters always, whether the person is there or not, includes a third. Either physically or emotionally, this invisible third is the one that facilitates our eroticism. This can even be a fantasy of the very person we make love to, because of course we do not totally understand the person we make love to. I love the way the film renders this as an effort by Joy to sync with her doppelganger. But of course, it can never be perfect, so the eerie way the features of the two women reverberate in and out of each other is, in sum, an incredible scene that is peak science fiction. But alas, the film robs some of the glory of the original by speaking for Deckard's humanity, by referencing the original film, and using the original material in ways that I wish were explored deeper. In Villeneuve's hands, some of the bleakness of the original is passed over for sentimentality instead. Much of the effort of design is iterative of the original, with a sleek look that feels off to me. What I really wanted was for Villeneuve to do his own science fiction story, not to do a sequel. I think much of this aesthetic, without the Blade Runner moniker, would shed the weight of history and create, instead, something inventive and freeing, especially in its aesthetic design. Perhaps Villeneuve was aware of this, and if I wanted to put my tinfoil hat on, I would say that many of the questions of authenticity in this film could also be turned on itself, in the way that 2049 goes through the motions of the original, but cannot possibly convey the exact substance of what makes the original so great. Who knows? Still, 2049 manages to create a lot of rich interactions between characters and world that do a lot to create immersion. The sets, the machines, the set pieces, and seeing Agent K move through them feel very much like an odyssey. I mean that word explicitly. An odyssey from visiting a great inventor of memories to an underworld of children bursting apart technology, a cybernetic blind man with a vision for power so harrowing that it might bring back slave ownership, and a world so disparate that Agent K feels more like a cowboy on a horse than a cop embedded in a city. It still evokes plenty enough to not give it short shrift. A 4 out of 5 works here. So then, a 4 out of 5. What these scores hide is a sort of fun factor, and I cannot deny that, out of the two films, I'd much rather watch 2049. It feels much more approachable compared to the cynicism and bitterness of the 1982 film, and so much of the murkiness of the city is almost overwhelming, like a handheld camera followed Deckard for a day in the life through such a shithole city. When Ridley Scott said he wanted to film the future through the past, there are elements of the noir that I really like, but plenty more of that I felt gratified in with 2049. Part of my differences in the scores reflects my look at the two films while being as objective as possible. While I think the 1982 film will be remembered still in the year 2049, I am far less confident of that with its sequel. It is painful for me to say that, but nonetheless, the feeling is there. Thanks for watching.